Hello, and welcome to the Our Sustainable World podcast, a series where we speak to some of the most innovative entrepreneurs across the globe working on sustainability. Today, we are hosted by the Forested team here in their office in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and I'm here with the founder and CEO, Ariana. Ariana, welcome.
Thank you, Nick. Well, welcome to you. First time in Ethiopia.
Yes.
And we're really happy to have you.
Yes, today is our first day in Ethiopia. We flew in and landed at 7 a.m. this morning. And didn't get too much sleep on the plane. So we definitely needed the coffee that you gave us upon arrival.
Yeah, definitely. No, every time we have guests or whenever there's a holiday, we tend to do coffee ceremony with the team, which is kind of showcasing the tradition of roasting coffee, smelling the aromas, smelling frankincense, and also eating popcorn.
Yeah, and it was a great start to our trip and a great start to our experience of Ethiopian culture.
Happy to hear. More injera next.
Thank you. Can you tell us a bit about Forested? What are Forested trying to achieve? What was the mission?
Forested's mission is intact biodiverse ecosystems. And the way that we're achieving that is through showing that forests can be much more lucrative, kept conserved versus destroyed. And from a business model perspective, what we actually are is an ingredient insets marketplace. I'll break that down a little bit more, but essentially it's a platform for regenerative ingredient sourcing where we work with consumer packaged goods companies. Right now we work with a lot of cosmetics companies and help them access their raw materials like some of these, honeys, other bee products, nuts, coffee byproduct. Anyways, the list goes on, but helping them access these critical raw materials in addition to the environmental footprint of these ingredients. And then obviously on the supply side, which is where all the impact is, we work with community-led conservation groups, essentially mostly indigenous community members who are land stewards over native, richly biodiverse ecosystems who produce these incredible ingredients from the forest.
Amazing. Thank you. And you mentioned the term sort of regenerative agriculture there. For the people who are maybe not as clued up in this the sustainability space. What do you mean by the term regenerative agriculture?
Yeah. So I guess the best way to define regenerative is in the context of sustainable. I think when you actually, utilize land in a way you're giving back to soil, to biodiversity, to communities, and you're kind of whatever you do with land, you're making sure that it has more than when you came with.
Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. So, tell us about the story of why did you get into this space and where did this concept of regenerative agriculture first come into your head?
Forested's origin story, like most startups, was not linear. And before we really got into concepts and values and principles of regenerative agriculture, it was really about designing a business model where conservation of biodiverse ecosystems was the consequence. So I would probably have to rewind to 9 years ago when I first came to Ethiopia. I was working with an NGO called TechnoServe. They do incredible work related to building supply chains of different agricultural products that work more favor in people and the planet. So we would work with the likes of, a lot of private companies like Diageo, Nespresso, Mondelez, also do kind of more traditionally donor-funded projects from the likes of Gates. But all of the different projects are really about building supply chains that were inclusive of smallholder farmers, building those cooperatives' capacity, helping them work on business skills, agro-processing, and finally to get those to market. So I moved to Ethiopia January 2015, was really just supposed to be here for 5-6 months before I returned to my prior day job in management consulting. But long story short, kind of took my first step into a coffee field in rural Ethiopia and decided that if I were to have a career and impact, that trying something out in agriculture would make the most sense, just given how many people around the world are smallholder farmers. So worked with TechnoServe for about 3 years, did all different types of supply chain building work across coffee, malt barley, tomatoes, onions, bee products, spices, and kind of through all my community experiences, kept on realizing that market systems just don't work in favor of people and the planet. The way that our food systems and agricultural systems work are incredibly extractive. Countries of origin, like Ethiopia, who are kind of the bread baskets of a lot of agricultural production, never get kind of the better end of the stick in terms of the value of commodities being traded. And so realize that if the countries where these products are being produced are not getting enough money from these products, then there is no way that we could incentivize more sustainable and then regenerative land use. So about two years into working with TechnoServe, I worked on my first forest-related project. So it was with the Swedish government, SIDA, and we were looking to get one of the forests, the Mijing forest in Gambella region, biosphere reserve status with UNESCO. And my task was to work on a strategy for how we could combat further deforestation by improving farmer and land steward livelihoods off of non-timber forest products. So it's a bit jargony, but non-timber forest products are basically anything in the forest besides the timber. And so we were specifically looking at coffee, honey, and also some spices, and just trying to understand, with this thesis that we could combat deforestation through improving livelihoods from non-timber forest products, that we would be able to, see that forest conserved. So when I worked on that project, everything just clicked. I was in a forest looking at these incredible spices shooting out of the ground, crawling around trunks, the honey, the coffee, and, thinking to myself, I don't really understand why deforestation is as pressing of an issue as it is, because a lot of the world's most lucrative agricultural commodities come from forests. Like even when you think about big pharma, a lot of our drugs and medicine are inspired from forest botanicals. And so at that point, that was really when the inspiration for Forested came about, basically realizing that forests can be lucrative, kept intact. There was just a market player missing to really align the incentives of, smallholder farmers and land stewards, local, federal governments with these incredibly biodiverse, resources and natural capital. And then finally, markets of, cosmetics companies, apparel companies, food companies who all actually rely on these incredible ingredients from biodiverse ecosystems like forests. Forested was born really out of this realization that there needed to be a market player missing, building a business model where conservation was the consequence.
So, you mentioned one of the big things is regenerative agriculture, because of some of the, the deforestation to tackle that and regenerate some of the forest space that's been lost. Could you just give the audience a bit of context around what specific problems in maybe East Africa or within Ethiopia itself are with regards to, deforestation?
Yeah. So under the umbrella of regenerative agriculture, there are lots of kind of different practices. We are specifically focused on agroforestry, which also has a lot of different types of practices. But specifically under agroforestry, which is that kind of like the combination of agricultural systems and forestry, we do what we call forest farming. And the reason why we're really passionate about agroforestry as a means to combat deforestation is because it kind of implies that you can be making sustainable incomes from forest-based products. And deforestation is definitely kind of the key thing we're trying to combat. We're also kind of starting to creep into restoration in addition to conservation. And the reason, we could be doing this anywhere around the world. I think we could all say that planting trees or conserving forests anywhere in the world is pretty critical at this point, but we're specifically focused on Ethiopia, and then we'll kind of expand to East Africa because it's countries and regions like this that are really seeing some of the most aggressive rates of deforestation. And it's not because land stewards don't value climate and environment. They value the environment even more than a lot of folks in cities do. It's just that, when you are living kind of burr to burr or shilling to shilling, you don't really have the luxury of time, and so kind of need those quicker term gains. So one of the reasons why Forested has set up our HQ in Ethiopia, beyond the fact that kind of this was my entry point to the continent, is just how persistent native forest ecosystem loss is. So to date, Ethiopia has unfortunately lost 98% of its native forests. So when we say native, it also can be referred to as primary or ancient, but basically forests that are centuries and centuries years old. As you may know from the news, Ethiopia has done a lot of work planting lots of trees. The country even won the Guinness World Record for planting the most trees in a day, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And so that's fantastic, but there's not really a lot you can do to replace forests and ecosystems that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. And the reason why this is incredibly important to protect these native kind of ancient ecosystems is because they host much more biodiversity that is kind of developed, evolved over all of these centuries. And kind of beyond Ethiopia, one of the reasons that forested will stay pretty committed to these kind of global south subtropical tropical forests is because, one, they're getting deforested at faster rates than, other areas. And that's because these areas have the highest density of people living in sub-socioeconomic means and, biodiversity richness, which means that these forests are getting deforested at faster rates. The second is, as you can imagine, doing business in these subtropical, tropical areas is also some of the hardest places to business. And that's why we felt there was the greatest need here. And then third, these subtropical and tropical forests have some of the most incredible ingredients.
So Ariana, you've not always lived in Ethiopia. Can you tell us just a bit about your journey, where it all began for you, and then sort of how you got to here?
Yeah. So I'm originally from Hong Kong, and I'm not sure if you've been, but yeah, it's I would say it's kind of the epitome of a concrete jungle, despite the fact that Hong Kong is actually a beautiful kind of series of islands and mountains and ocean. And so I think in kind of reflecting on how I got from a cosmopolitan hub like Hong Kong to doing rural agriculture in a place like Ethiopia, I would actually say kind of growing up so far away from agriculture, and also like a lot of communities living in sub-socioeconomic means, is really what kind of amplified my kind of growing connection to trying to figure out how I could have impact in the food space. And so I think, growing up in Hong Kong, I obviously could never have imagined myself in Ethiopia. But growing up, I think I was always, as a child, just like really interested in problem solving. Like I've always loved like playing little games. I've always kind of loved being very imaginative. I wasn't a super social child, I would say. That kind of came, later on. But I would always kind of be off on my own, kind of building, tinkering with things. I would say like middle school, high school was very much, now in retrospect, I realized kind of an intrapreneur. I was always really passionate about kind of like looking at systems, whether it was like how we, manage all the activities of putting together the school yearbook, and just trying to figure out how can we make processes and systems better, if not actually come up with, new ideas from scratch. So I think that kind of thread of intrapreneurship, even before I became an entrepreneur, is kind of that consistent thread to how I got here.
Yeah, and I guess one thing that came to my mind was, I imagine the culinary experience is very different between Hong Kong and Ethiopia. How does the food compare?
So super different. I'm incredibly embarrassed to say that I never had injera or tried Ethiopian food until I moved to Ethiopia. But I think by virtue of growing up in Hong Kong, you are a foodie.
Yeah.
And as a part of that realization of how disconnected I was from food where it's from, even though I was, a huge consumer of it, I'm an enthusiast at that. I think a lot of that kind of drove my increasing interest in trying to figure out how to support food systems.
So being a CEO is a very tough job. Is this your first experience of a startup, or have you previously been involved in startups before?
I would consider building Forested my first kind of proper startup experience and first time being a CEO. I did dabble in kind of entrepreneurship before. So perhaps my first foray into entrepreneurship was when I was in high school and through university. I'd set up kind of an arts series. So back then, I was really passionate about North Korean issues. Gosh, actually, probably spent a decade of my life hosting arts events, from painting auctions to film screenings in Hong Kong, where I would raise funds for North Korean refugee efforts. And after that, worked with a couple of middle school friends to set up Hong Kong's first indoor specialty farm. We grew edible flowers and micro herbs. So still in the food space, but I would have to give all the credit to my co-founder, Jessica, who is still in Hong Kong, very much continuing to build and grow common farms. So even though I have had some entrepreneurial experience before, Forested is definitely the one where I feel like I jumped full in and kind of, really took on the CEO position and building things block by block.
Yeah, I've, in my experience, had a couple of failed startups in the past. I've done social cafes, tried to set up a social cafe, which didn't go very well. We started to try a healthy sort of ready meal business as well. At the age of 20, we had no idea about supply chains or anything like that, so that was a disaster. But Startup Lounge is going well so far.
I'm glad to hear.
We've been doing 3 or 4 years, we've survived, so that's a positive in the startup world.
Yeah, and I know this is a bit cliche, but I do feel like the journey is the reward. And so one memory sticks out to me when I was in graduate school at Yale School of Management, and I had received a small grant to incubate Forested. And I remember trying to hand in my budget, and the faculty being, she said something along the lines of, "Oh, we don't need this." And I was like, well, how do I report? How do I make sure that I'm accountable for how I use these funds? Like, what if I fail and this money could have gone to some other student whose business doesn't fail? And, her response was, Ariana, we see the entrepreneurial experience as being something that everyone should have. And if you fail, we don't care. Like, we believe that experience that you've had will benefit you, even if you do end up going into a corporate job or even, ditching entrepreneurship. And so that was really touching to me. And so I think when I hear from other founders who have started something and it didn't work, or they're, on to the next thing, I can only just imagine everything that they've been able to accumulate in knowledge and experience from that.
Yeah. For me, my biggest lessons in business and entrepreneurship have been through my biggest failures as well. So, absolutely, you're right. You kind of fail your way to success in a sense. I'm interested. What sort of challenges do you in the business face at the moment?
So I think every founder will probably say capital, and if it's not today, then they'll say it tomorrow.
Yeah.
So Forested has been around for 5 years now, and we have yet to raise our first venture capital round, which is pretty uncommon for a company like ours. We are hopefully going to close our first institutional or VC round in the next couple of months. But I would say over the 5-year journey, probably like managing cash in, cash out has probably been pretty tricky. Also management, I would say personally for me, before starting Forested, I had managed peers and colleagues from like a work stream perspective, but I've never actually managed, a team of 15 plus people, and, not just thinking about the work stream, but also thinking about their career and how to kind of upskill them and give them opportunities that are fulfilling so they stay with us year after year. I would also say in our line of business, which, we're at the intersection of agricultural trade and environmental data, lots of logistics issues, building an agribusiness and dealing with physical supply chains. There's always challenges, no matter how many experts you have on your team, related to shipping, working capital access, deploying that capital, transport. I mean, even just Friday, we heard some terrible news that our shipment to a cosmetics buyer in the UK was damaged. And so we have 2 barrels of 600 kilos, if not more, that kind of got to Felixstowe, if you know where that port is.
Okay.
But that got to Felixstowe and were tampered with. So I'd say that was, really disappointing for our team.
Yeah, there's lots of challenges there, and some of those definitely resonate with me. It's quite interesting when you go from working in like a consulting space where you've got a team, you're responsible for just delivering, the project or the job, and that's your main focus. But when you move to that, being the CEO, you're responsible now for making sure people get paid at the end of the month so they can feed their families. So there's an enhanced pressure there where you need to make this work, not just for yourself, but for all these other people that are now, you're kind of responsible for from a career and working perspective.
Definitely, yeah.
As a startup, you can't really make it on your own. You need lots of support and partnerships. Is there any partners or organizations that you've been working with throughout your journey that have really helped Forested become what it is today?
We owe so many people and so many organizations credit for what we are and are continuing to build today. I may have mentioned before that we have yet to raise a first VC round. And really that's because of not only the support, but also the collaboration of so many partners. So, friends and family and angel investors who have supported us up to date. One of the benefits of being a social enterprise is that you can access kind of a lot of blended financing support. We've received a lot of support, both funding and operational partnership from Germany's GIZ, also some support from USAID, the Mulago Foundation, which has been an incredible strategic thought partner, as well as a lot of buyers. As we've evolved in our business, Lush Cosmetics was one of the first buyers who kind of pulled Forested into the natural ingredient space. And really without all of this partnership, we couldn't be here. And I could probably go on and on for like several more minutes and list off all the people that have enabled us to get here today.
What does the future hold for Forested now that you've got to where you are today? You've survived the initial few years of being a startup, which is a great achievement in itself. But what's the vision? Where do you go next?
So you're asking at a good time. Forested is actually in the third iteration of our business model. I call this V3. So since day one, back in 2017, the mission has remained the same, which is intact biodiverse ecosystems. Similarly, what is the same is that we are approaching conservation through the industry of natural ingredients. So back in kind of 2017, 2019, our business model manifesting into that mission was that of a direct-to-consumer specialty honey brand. So you can see some of our honeys here, but basically what we did was kind of assembled a little over 100 farmers, trained them in regenerative honey production, bottled that in Addis Ababa, and with the support of some interns in Brooklyn, where we bottled it, and then put it on an e-commerce site, and did the whole specialty food play. We worked with Michelin star restaurants, celebrity chefs, other food influencers, and finally brought that to market. And so even though that business model worked, we had the gross margins to scale, break even, I basically took a step back, and this was maybe in the beginning of COVID, and I asked myself, is this business model, this specialty food business, is it going to get us to conservation at scale? And the answer was no. And so kind of with that, in around 2020, that's when I raised kind of our friends and family round. And, we said, we need to build a trading company. And at that point in time, I was going around being like, we are the forest-friendly Cargill, and kind of imagine setting up factories, networks of, millions and millions of farmers all around East Africa, and kind of moving, container loads of products from forest to manufacturing site to market. And so, in 2021, kind of was finally able to get the resources to build our factory here where we're sitting. So kind of scaled up our network of farmers from 100 to over 1,000, started operating across 4 different forests in Ethiopia, southwest region, Oromia, as well as Gambela. Then processed those products, mostly honey, some beeswax. Also kind of started dabbling in endemic spices and processed them here in our factory, and then finally brought them to market to global food and beverage and cosmetics companies like Lush. But again, last year was starting to get that itch again around our impact. And even though we had scaled up our impact in terms of the amount of hectares of forest we were able to impact, as well as land stewards and smallholders that we were able to work with, I asked myself again, is this business model going to get us to the ambition that we want? So for us, by 2050, we want to be able to have supported the conservation and restoration of over 500 million hectares of land. And would our business model cut it? And again, the answer was no. So about a year ago, we did a lot of soul searching, and from the very humbling experience of building an agribusiness and a trading company in Ethiopia, we started to reflect on a lot of our own challenges, like challenges with getting working capital, challenges with how to better design contract farming and farming partnerships. How do we better commercialize products and get them to the likes of these global consumer packaged goods companies? And realized that we had heard from a lot of other peer agribusinesses in Ethiopia, also across East Africa, and everyone wanted the same things and wanted a lot of these same challenges fixed. And I think particularly what was very exciting for a lot of people was this kind of growing world of voluntary carbon credits, and all these agribusinesses and really any business that touches land was like, how do I get a piece of that? And so kind of consolidating all these insights from our peer organizations and really reflecting on our own challenges in agribusiness, realized that where our value add in the market for conservation oriented trade, what was really in becoming a platform and a marketplace. So over the past year and moving into the future, Forested is really transitioning from, an Ethiopian-based agroforestry trading company to, as I mentioned, an ingredient insets marketplace, or a platform for regenerative ingredient sourcing. And so as we transition into this marketplace, we've started to work with many other small, medium enterprises like Forested. So some of them are kind of more well-established farmer cooperatives and unions. Some of them are enterprises like Forested, but working with these SMEs in Ethiopia and also Kenya and Uganda to kind of bring their incredible ingredients and value chains to market. And as we build into a marketplace, a lot of what we're doing is, imagining, prototyping a suite of solutions. And each of these solutions should be able to increase the commercial value of these ingredient supply chains. So for example, one of the first innovations that we're developing as a solution is what we are calling an insetting calculator. So this will be a primary data collection tool in addition to a kind of back-end calculator of our marketplace, where we will be able to calculate the carbon and nature footprint of an ingredient. So the idea is that as we commercialize products, there's a lot of these kind of global consumer packaged goods companies who have set these, crazy ambitious net zero nature positive goals. And so we will be able to deliver them, containers of ingredients, say beeswax for lipstick, and say, hey, here's this beeswax, a container load comes with X thousand units of carbon and Y thousand units of biodiversity. And so even if sourcing incredible ingredients from, rural fragmented sources like, land stewards is going to be a bit more expensive, companies get to actually deduct those environmental units from their environmental P&L sheets. So the insetting calculator is the first solution that we're super excited to be building. But we're also working on a couple of other innovations, like a financing vehicle. Right now, what we're incubating with an incredible organization in South Africa called the Sustainable Finance Coalition is actually a pollinator bond. So we're calling it Bee Bond, but basically what we are imagining it as is a fundraising mechanism to actually establish a working capital facility to provide quicker access, lower interest loans to all the small, medium enterprises and agribusinesses who are practicing regenerative agriculture, to help them maintain and also scale their production of different ingredients to bring to market.
That sounds amazing. There's a lot going on there, a lot to unpack. It sounds like from the supplier side, there's quite a lot happening. There's a lot of interest, different smallholder farmers, different groups sort of interested in selling their products on the marketplace. What has been your views of how sort of the buy side, how is that developing? Are companies quite keen to buy from this sort of marketplace and buy into this sort of concept?
When it comes to climate and nature commitments, it's a very exciting time because there's more pressure for the world's largest companies to do their part in working towards net zero and nature positivity. So one of the good things is that we're seeing more commitments being made. We're seeing more investments being made from these companies to actually work towards that. But one of the challenges that Forested is trying to see as an opportunity is that a lot of these companies are really looking for partners to help them, define and measure progress against these commitments. So in particular, we are very interested in carbon and nature insetting versus offsetting. So just to quickly define insetting in comparison to offsetting is when companies reduce their carbon footprint through their own supply chains. And the reason why we're really excited about insetting is because insetting actually provides a economy for land stewards to engage in that touches upon the physical aspects of their world, like ingredients and agriculture. What's been really interesting is talking to a lot of the communities we work with about the opportunity for carbon credits as well as the emerging nature credits. And even though farmers and local government stakeholders can understand that the carbon market is something that countries like Ethiopia need to tap into and they want to, they're much more passionate about their physical economy. Like they live amongst trees, wildlife, and they would much rather invest their time and energy in innovating around something that can protect their physical environment beyond just valuing carbon that's being sequestered and stored in these ecosystems. And insetting really addresses that.
I was to ask you, where do you see Forested being in 10 years' time, and what kind of impact you'd be having? Sort of best case scenario, let's say. Mm-hmm. What would you respond to that?
In 10 years' time, I would hope that Forested has had enough impact on, a certain hectareage of land, and definitely, hopefully, worked with a network of over 1 million smallholder farmers, such that policymakers are actually coming to us and asking for us to help inform policies that can, re-engineer land use in a way that works more in favor of people and the planet. But to be a bit more quantitative, I would say in 10 years, I would hope that Forested is working across not just countries and landscapes within Africa, but also across Southeast Asia, Latin America. I would hope that in 10 years, we are dealing with, over 10,000 ingredients and working with a network of at least over 1 million land stewards.
Oh, brilliant. So you heard it here first. That's the target for 10 years' time. We'll come back in and check on those stats with you and see how you're getting on.
Yes. And perhaps we'll be the Alibaba of regenerative agriculture.
I love that. That's a great way to put it. Ariana, thank you so much for giving us your time today and opening your doors to us at the Forested site. It's been fantastic. Everyone's been so welcoming, and we can't wait to see how the rest of your journey goes. So yeah, thank you. I feel like I've learned so much about agroforestry and restorative agriculture today. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for visiting. We're very honored to be your first stop on your Eastern and Southern Africa tour. And yeah, really excited to show you the forest.
Excellent. Thanks, Ariana.